comes after he held a listening session yesterday with survivors of gun violence. As soon as we have that conversation, we're going to bring it to you. Hi, everyone. I'm Anne-Marie Green.
And I'm Vladimir Jute. Thanks for joining us. So on Twitter today, President Trump called for a series of gun control measures. In a tweet, he wrote that he will be pushing for comprehensive background checks with an emphasis on mental health.
He also wants to raise the age restriction for buying rifles to 21 and end the sale of bump stocks. He also clarified his position on allowing guns on school campuses, writing that he wants to look into the possibility of giving concealed guns to gun-adept teachers with military or special training experience. Only the best. He goes on to write that 20% of teachers, a lot, would now be able to immediately fire back if a savage sicko came to school with bad intentions.
David Hogg, one of the students from Stoneman Douglas High who survived the school shooting that killed 17 people, responded, writing, "That's your opinion, and I respect that, but I absolutely disagree. I don't think we have the time or money to train teachers. Hashtag never again."
So this all comes after an emotional listening session with victims of gun violence yesterday. Students, teachers, and parents who have all been impacted by school shootings spoke directly to President Trump, demanding changes on gun safety. As Margaret Brennan reports, President Trump will hold another meeting today to discuss school safety with state and local officials.
I want to listen, and then after I listen, we're going to get things done.
One by one, survivors of school shootings and their family members shared their pain.
And I'm pissed, because my daughter I'm not going to see again.
I lost a best friend, who's practically a brother.
People are dying, and we have to stop this.
And I'm just begging for a change. We need a change.
Andrew Pollock lost his 18-year-old daughter, Meadow, in the Florida shooting.
My daughter has no voice. She was murdered last week, and she was taken from us. Shot 9 times on the 3rd floor. We, as a country, failed our children.
Pollock asked for more school security, but said it's not about gun laws. Senior Sam Zeif, whose best friend died in the massacre, wondered why it was so easy to buy an AR-15, the assault rifle used by the shooter.
I don't understand why I could still go in a store and buy a weapon of war.
As for possible solutions, President Trump focused on strengthening background checks, increasing mental health services, and even arming school staff.
If you had a teacher who was adept at firearms, they could very well end the attack very quickly.
This is my son, Daniel.
Mark Barden lost his 6-year-old son just over 5 years ago in the Sandy Hook Elementary School massacre.
School teachers have more than enough responsibilities right now than to have the awesome responsibility of lethal force to take a life.
It did make a difference. They needed to hear it from us students.
Now we're leaving it up to him to make the change that we need.
After meeting with the president, CBS News spoke with some of the students who said listening is not enough.
He heard our cries, and he talked to us, and I think he understood where we were coming from, but the NRA wasn't there.
Zeif said arming teachers is not the answer.
This is a problem because guns were brought into our school. Why would it make sense to bring more guns into school?
Well, that was our Margaret Brennan reporting there. And now CBS News has named Margaret Brennan the new moderator of Face the Nation. Margaret has been the White House and senior foreign affairs correspondent here at CBS.
She takes over at the Face the Nation for John Dickerson this Sunday, who is now, as you probably know, the co-host of CBS This Morning. Margaret has worked for CBS since 2012 and has extensive experience covering the White House and the State Department. You can watch Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation this Sunday on CBS. You can also watch right here on CBSN Sundays at 11 a.m. and 6 p.m. Eastern.
We congratulate Margaret. Yeah. We're so happy for her. This is really great news, and we know she'll do an amazing job.
She will.
Well, the message from survivors of the Florida school shooting is resonating across the country. Students from Washington State to Washington, D.C. walked out of schools yesterday demanding stricter gun control laws.
More than 1,000 people rallied outside Florida's state capitol, while students from Stoneman Douglas High lobbied state lawmakers.
Coming after you. We are coming after every single one of you and demanding that you take action, demanding that you make a change.
If we are going to protect our future, why are we not protecting our children?
Well,
Marie, it was a mixed bag. We spoke to some students who said, you know what, lawmakers really listened to us. They treated us like adults. They treated us like we were valued, and we asked them pointed questions. We sat inside 3 of these meetings, and the students were incredibly specific. They said, you know, what is your position on assault rifles? Do you think all of them should be banned? If assault rifles are not good for hunting, these students said, because they're so powerful that they would destroy whatever was shot with it, why are they legal? Why are they not just reserved for the military? And when the lawmakers replied, they looked for areas where they could agree. You know, the lawmakers I saw were very sympathetic toward the students. They spoke about the need for better mental health checks within the background check system, but we heard a lot of vague answers. There were some points that lawmakers weren't ready yet to really take a specific position on, but they said they wanted to look into some issues. So they seem, at least from our perspective, from what we saw, open-minded. And the students told us that they appreciated the candid discussions that they had. They felt supported, and they felt, one girl told me that she felt like something positive was going to come from this in terms of what she wanted. But other students thought they got the runaround, and they thought this was politics as usual. And toward the end of the day, the energy really escalated on the 4th floor of the Capitol, where students gathered and they started protesting, holding signs. It was emotional. You know, you could see the anger on people's faces, and they wanted the people inside the House chamber, this is right outside, to hear their message. And you know, you couldn't not hear it, because students were outside the Capitol, they were inside the Capitol, they were protesting, they were in the galleries of the chambers. I mean, the students really flooded this area, both inside the Capitol and outside.
Adriana Diaz, you know, it was just, I've said this to you yesterday, knowing that many of the student sit-ins, many of the attempts to change segregation in the South in the late 50s and early 60s came about because of students. It wasn't an easy road, but ultimately it led to change. Hopefully we're seeing a little bit of that here today. Adriana, thank you so much for your reporting. We appreciate it as always. Well, coming up, we are learning more about the funeral plans for the late Reverend Billy Graham, including how you will get a chance to pay respects to the world's best-known evangelist.
And take a look at this fiery explosion on a ferry boat in Mexico. We'll tell you how the survivors are doing. Keep it right here. You're streaming CBSN. This dramatic surveillance video shows an explosion on a ferry in Playa del Carmen, Mexico. Investigators are trying to determine what caused the blast yesterday.
As many as 25 people were hurt, including at least 7 Americans. Security camera footage shows the moment a fireball ripped through the center of the ferry. The boat had just docked at the beach town of Playa del Carmen. Passengers were still disembarking when the explosion sent debris and shrapnel into the water and the crowd. Emergency crews rushed to the scene and tended to the injured. Mexican officials say 18 people were taken to the hospital. Images of the aftermath show a gaping hole in the center of the ship.
From my right side, I just heard this loud boom.
Rebecca and Steve Lallam's family were on the dock waiting for another ferry to Cozumel when the blast happened.
There was a lot of debris in the air. There was a lot of glass. There was others that had been knocked. They fell so quickly when the blast happened that they had fallen unconscious because they just hit the ground so hard.
The couple's 2 young sons suffered minor cuts and bruises from the explosion. They were taken to the hospital where they received stitches and were released.
Emergency responders showed up very quickly. Police were there very quickly.
Others were definitely not as lucky and have a little more recovery than we do.
No one was killed. Local officials say preliminary reports indicate the explosion was due to mechanical failure. A deeper investigation into exactly what caused that failure is ongoing.
That looked pretty bad.
I mean, when you see that footage, it's just remarkable, thankfully, that no one was more critically hurt.
Yeah. Well, the fate of a convicted Texas killer is in the hands of the state's governor, Greg Abbott. Thomas Bart Whitaker is scheduled to receive a lethal injection later today after arranging the killings of his mother and brother at their Houston home in 2003.
Whitaker's father, Kent, was also shot but survived and has led the effort to save his 38-year-old son from execution.
I would like my son to be allowed to live so that he can continue to do some of the things that it's doing now behind bars.
The state parole board has recommended Whitaker's life be spared. The final decision is now up to Governor Abbott.
The Reverend Billy Graham, the world's best-known evangelist, known for his stirring sermons, will be buried a week from tomorrow in North Carolina. The public can pay their respects in Charlotte on Monday and Tuesday while his body is in repose. David Begnaud is inside the Billy Graham Library in Charlotte, near the place Graham will be laid to rest.
Yes, Jesus has the answer to life's problems.
Reverend Billy Graham's funeral service will be held under a tent. It's a fitting venue for someone who rose to prominence, preaching under the Canvas Cathedral in Los Angeles.
That the Lord Jesus Christ can be received, your sins forgiven, your burdens lifted.
Invitations to next Friday's private funeral service have been extended to President Donald Trump and all former presidents who are still alive. Barack Obama called Billy Graham a humble servant who gave hope and guidance to generations of Americans.
When I touch that podium, I can feel a new strength and a new power come.
Known as America's pastor, he will be buried in a casket made by prisoners. It's a pine plywood box lined with a mattress pad. Spokesman Mark DeMoss said Billy Graham died at home. No one else was with him except for a nurse. His doctor said Graham just wore out.
I think we can say he passed in his sleep. It was described by the nurse and his doctor as a very peaceful passing. He was not in any pain.
His life was not without controversy.
I told you one time that the Bible talks about 2 kinds of Jews. One is called the synagogue of Satan.
A taped phone call between him and President Nixon drew criticism from the Jewish community. His ministry also supported a ballot measure banning gay marriage in 2012. While his views were controversial, televangelist Joel Osteen calls him a hero.
Growing up as a little boy, coming from a preacher's kid, we watched him on television, and so he was somebody that we always looked up to and admired.
Here at the Billy Graham Library in Charlotte, North Carolina, everyone enters through the cross. That's exactly how Reverend Graham wanted it. When his family came to him and talked about the idea of a library, he hated the thought that it would be a memorial or a museum to honor him. But when they came back and said, well, Daddy, what if we do it as an ongoing ministry? He liked that idea. Billy Graham, we're told, planned every aspect of his funeral and signed off on the final plan.
David, your live shot position is in the entryway of the library, and it's absolutely breathtaking in its simplicity. It's not, it's just with the woodwork and the automobile in the background. You mentioned the funeral. I wonder if you could give us a couple of details about what you know.
Absolutely. The funeral will be closed to the public. It's invitation only. We expect that there will be high-level dignitaries, possibly former presidents, who will come. Let me take you outside and show you. First of all, a little look at the property. As you come out of the museum, workers have been for the last 24 hours putting in new sod and flowers to get the place ready. That is the childhood home of Billy Graham. It's where he grew up. He didn't grow up here. He grew up a few miles down the road, but the house was torn down and then rebuilt right here. Billy Graham's body will be brought here to the library. It will lie in repose in his boyhood home. The public will be allowed to pay their respects. The casket's going to be closed to the public, but that's where the lying in repose will happen. The parking lot houses the international media that's been here for the last 24 hours. We're told the tent, that giant tent that will be where the funeral happens, will be placed right over the parking lot there, and people will take their seats. Again, that tent was so important to the life of Billy Graham because back in the old days, when Billy Graham was doing his crusades, you didn't have coliseums or civic centers, right? So Billy Graham had these tents and wooden structures commissioned for wherever he went. In fact, I just saw a poster in the library that said, here at the Charlotte Coliseum, come see Billy Graham, and a couple days later, come see Elvis. We're walking to what will be the final resting place for Reverend Graham. He's going to be laid to rest right alongside his wife of nearly 65 years, by the way. She is buried here at the library, and Billy Graham wanted the burial, and he wanted the grave to be as simplistic as possible, and he will get that. It's beautiful, though, as you walk to it. Really pretty. But the grave of Ruth Graham, no flowers, not much fanfare, is just ahead of us on the left, and Billy Graham will be buried right alongside his wife. In fact, Franklin Graham said he asked his father one time, "Daddy, what do you want on your tombstone?" And Billy Graham had a one-word response. He said, "Preacher."
I'm sure every detail has been planned for, but I cannot imagine the crowd that they are expecting. Any idea just how many people will be showing up to pay their respects?
It's funny, I just talked to one of the media representatives and he said, we're expecting a ton of people. He didn't put a number on it, but you know, people from all over the world who will come. And again, and every past president who's still living has been offered an invitation. We don't know who will accept, but there's enough seats, we're told, for about 2,300 people, and they expect to fill every one of them.
And you know, he was a confidant of many presidents and other prominent people. Any big names that we know of?
No. Again, have not heard one big name. Not one.
Interesting. And would be appropriate, I'm sure there will be some people that we know that will attend, but it would be appropriate for them to be treated just sort of like everyone else.
Exactly right.
Yeah. David Begnaud, North Carolina, thank you so much.
You bet.
Still to come, Americans impacted by gun violence take their fight for stricter gun control to the White House.
We'll tell you what the president is saying in response to their calls for action. You're streaming CBSN.
news right now? We've got the app for that.
This is CBSN.
We're just on the front lines. Police have surrounded the area.
It's still unclear what caused this fire, why it spread so quickly.
There are flooded homes like the one behind me for miles.
Change is what many people here are looking for.
And now they're trying to pin the ISIS gunmen down.
The marchers were saying, let us march. We want to march.
CBSN, CBS News, always on.
The NRA's Executive Vice President and CEO, Wayne LaPierre, addressed school safety today in the wake of the Douglas Stoneman shooting. Here's some of what he had to say during his speech at the Conservative Political Action Conference in Maryland.
Every day, young children are being dropped off at schools that are virtually wide open, soft targets for anyone bent on mass murder. It should not be easier for a madman to shoot up a school than a bank or a jewelry store or some Hollywood gala. Schools must be the most hardened targets in this country, and evil must be confronted immediately with all necessary force to protect our kids.
Well, all this comes after President Trump spent the morning clarifying his own comments about arming teachers on school campuses. He also called for an end to gun-free zones at schools on Twitter, calling them, quote, a magnet for bad people.
Meanwhile, Vice President Mike Pence addressed the crowd, touching on school safety, border security, North Korea, and the economy. Earlier, we broke down both speeches, starting with the vice president's with our Weijia Jiang and Politico's Daniel Strauss.
Look, that was a strong speech, and it really underscores that he has a strong relationship with the base and that Republicans feel that this administration is doing very well right now. The fact that he started with remarks about the shooting, I think, also underscores the state of the debate on gun control. We're seeing both Republicans and Democrats really review this issue and look for some kind of policy change or some kind of solution to stop these massacres. That's really different than what's happened in past shootings, where we've seen discussions of changes for mental health policy, maybe something on gun control, but really nothing as stark as the talks that are going on now.
Daniel, as you heard, the NRA's Wayne LaPierre echoed the president's call today to end gun-free zones at school. So the answer, according to Wayne LaPierre, in the wake of a horrific massacre at a school where an 18-year-old was able to bring an AR-15 into that school and kill these students, is we need more guns at these schools. And if you went to my high school, where there are a bunch of fifth-year seniors that are 18, they would be legally allowed to carry guns if the school was gun-free. How likely is this initiative to get support in Congress?
Look, I think it's a really, really unlikely idea. Just logistically alone, the idea of arming teachers, going through background checks for teachers and personnel to have more guns in school is fraught and very complicated. So just on implementing it alone, I don't think it's something that we're going to see anytime soon.
So this morning, the president laid out his gun legislation plan in tweets, of course. He included stricter background checks with a focus on mental health, raising the age limit for those who can buy rifles, and ending the sale of bump stocks. Explain what happens next, though. How does the White House move forward with this tweeted out plan?
I mean, you tell me. There are a lot of times that President Trump has tweeted out an idea or a plan and then nothing really has happened on it, or something sort of only vaguely reminiscent of the original idea has happened. In this case, I think we will see lawmakers in Congress put forward some kind of legislation in response to the shooting massacre, but I don't know if it's going to resemble at all anything like what Trump tweeted out.
So, Daniel, where is the NRA willing to compromise? There was a congressman, I forget his name, in Florida, who, in the wake of the Pulse shootings, changed his position on weapons, on guns. The NRA had given him money. They stopped giving him money, and he was unable to be effective. Is there any sense from your colleagues there at Politico, other reporters you've spoken to, the NRA perhaps, that they would be willing to compromise at all when the president says he wants to raise the age limit? That would seem to me that would go against most of the principles and ideals of the National Rifle Association.
Yeah, look, I think we're going to have to wait and see on that. The issue here really is that the NRA has always been very active in arguing that more guns, not less. A good shooter is the best response to a bad shooter. I think we have seen them sort of change their tune on bump stocks, and I think that's a big thing. That is a sign that the NRA is not totally unwilling to change their positions in general, but anything massive for them is going to seem sort of small compared for gun rights or anti-gun control advocates. So I think possibly we could see something from the NRA on maybe changing their policy on the most aggressive automatic weapons, but I don't think we're going to see any changes on something like concealed carry.
So, Daniel, I want you to sort of stand by. We want to bring in Weijia Jiang. Weijia, you're at CPAC. We just listened to the Vice President address the crowd there. How was he received?
Well, it depends on what he was talking about. There were moments that were silent, as expected, when he was talking about the victims briefly in the Florida shooting. There were moments where they rose to their feet and clapped and cheered when he talked about the accomplishments of the administration so far, when he talked about his personal decision not to stand with the sister of Kim Jong-un during the Olympics. So overall, because this is the first big-ticket speech, it is exactly what we thought, which was a mix. As the country continues to grapple with this debate over gun control, it's not only dominating the conversation among participants, but it's really setting the tone. And I can tell you, compared to last year, when it was just about a month, after the president was inaugurated, it almost felt like a victory party here at the conference. But even though there's an optimism because the nature of the conference and them sharing goals, there is a much darker undertone. And so at appropriate points for cheering, that certainly happened when the vice president talked. But I have to say that it feels different because the members that we spoke with, the people here, are very aware that they have to walk that fine line between being empathetic to the victims, but also for standing for their passions, which include the Second Amendment.
You know, one of the other questions that I had for you is, you pointed out rightfully so that last year this did feel like a victory party for the president, for the principles of conservatives and, generally speaking, the Republican Party. But given all that's transpired, and the vice president laid out a very good speech where he talked about the many successes as far as the Republicans are concerned, appointing conservative judges, the economy that is doing very well, the tax plan that they were able to implement, even the stock market, which I would argue the fact that we've seen it weaken slightly is actually a good thing, which does prove that the American economy is strong. Yet there is that undercurrent of this Russia investigation. There is that undercurrent of women that have come out and said that the president of the United States sexually assaulted or harassed them in some instances. And so I'm curious, given that this is the ultra-conservative wing of the Republican Party, evangelicals make up a large part of that, if there isn't sort of a pulling back, even as the president's numbers have dipped slightly amongst hardcore supporters, perhaps because of some of those things that they are facing in the days and months ahead.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned that because we spoke with participants about the general mood for the party looking ahead because we are still only in a relatively new administration, but there is cautious optimism, right? On the one hand, people we spoke with are celebrating those victories and very quick to point out all the things that President Trump said he was going to do and accomplished. On the other, we just spoke with a group from South Carolina who said, frankly, they need to strategize. They need to make sure that they continue using whatever momentum they have, because they're very aware that midterm elections are right around the corner. And while they will continue to praise the president, they also know that the numbers are telling, and he is not popular among many Americans, and he has been sharply criticized for a lot of his policy decisions. So they know that it is an uphill battle, because their biggest concern is that there's a sharp turn during those elections, and then you have a potential for a lame duck situation as the president looks to 2020. But I would say that there is still a lot of optimism, because remember, this is essentially a rally, an annual meeting where it's not only about planning and meeting and discussing, but it is about celebrating what they have done so far.
I'm curious if you spoke to anybody who was there about their feelings about the FBI. You know, we heard from Mike Pence, who said, you know, something about standing, giving law enforcement the respect that they deserve and standing with law enforcement. But Wayne LaPierre, the CEO of the NRA, was critical of the FBI.
As have a lot of Republicans. They've been
recently. Yeah, well, yeah, right. No, it's not just the Russia investigation, but now on top of the Russia investigation, we have the shooting in Florida. I'm wondering what the general feeling is amongst those conservative members about the FBI.
You know, in the context of the gun debate, certainly we did talk to people. We just spoke with a mother who said, you know, yes, she supports the Second Amendment, but really pointed the finger at the FBI for not being proactive when they received tips about the shooter in Florida, and for not really taking more action and having more resources to investigate tips. And it was interesting because you could tell that she was struggling with, you know, wanting to maintain what she believes are rights, but also being very aware as a mother that this could happen to her own children. But she did not put the burden on Congress or the president to tighten up gun control laws, but rather on investigators, from even her local police, and doing more at schools, to the FBI following up on tips, making sure they're monitoring and tracking potential mass shootings. And so that is part of the conversation here. It is a target, as you mentioned, for the NRA, because they're not going to come out and say, you're right, we need to have stricter laws when it comes to guns. But certainly they can shift that narrative to, we need to have stricter regulations and enforcement of the laws already on the books.
Let's go back to Daniel Strauss. We just stand by. We'll come back to you. But Daniel, you're in Politico's offices there in Virginia. And, you know, the point that we were just making about the criticism that we've heard from not just Wayne LaPierre, the head of the NRA, but other Republican members of Congress criticizing the Federal Bureau of Investigation, criticizing law enforcement in the case of missing some of these red flags. We had Dan Senior, who I know you know very well, here. Dan is a well-known political operative, a political analyst for the Republican Party. And Dan said to us, that he was surprised. He never thought that in his lifetime he would hear conservatives, Republicans primarily, criticizing the FBI. Now, the FBI has been criticized in the past. You would think that actually the right and the left would be able to come to some consensus that the FBI has not always had a pristine history, shall we say, when it comes to law enforcement in this country, particularly when it was headed by J. Edgar Hoover and during the Civil Rights Movement, and some of the things you learned about what they did, the tactics they employed against Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But I wonder, are you surprised to hear at this CPAC convention, forget the politicians, forget the members of Congress, but just sort of the rank and file sort of also voicing this, what's the word I would use for the way that they feel about the FBI?
It is criticism, and I think, you know, to a certain degree, distrust.
Distrust.
Yeah, I mean, look, it is a contrast from past CPACs that I've attended where the FBI didn't come up. And it's an unusual discussion at a time when the President of the United States is having to deal with an FBI investigation into the 2016 election. But I guess this really sort of underscores really the support President Trump has among the CPAC-going base of the Republican Party. He's criticized the FBI and Mueller in the past, and we're hearing echoes of that at CPAC. It's very unusual, though.
I think that's fascinating, sort of differentiating between the support at CPAC for the Republican Party and the support for the president. I mean, that's one of the things that I think that the Republican Party is going to have to grapple with moving forward into the midterm elections is, and we saw this with the special election in Alabama, is whether or not the support for the president can be transferred, and whether or not the NRA can criticize the FBI, and perhaps the president can criticize the FBI, but they may not want to hear it from, say, their congressional representatives.
Absolutely, and Daniel, as you know, it's not. I heard Vice President Pence say that's why we have to ensure that the Republicans maintain control of both houses of Congress. That, he said something along the lines of, can you imagine Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer as speakers of their respective houses? The reality for Democrats is this is not an uphill battle either. They cannot just simply run on saying, we oppose everything that Donald Trump is doing, because millions of people voted for him and millions of people still support him and his policies. And, Alabama was a unique situation. It was an alleged pedophile that he was running against. That state, for those who are watching, is not representative of red states in this country.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Vice President Pence's line in there warning about the possibility that Nancy Pelosi could become the Speaker of the House and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer could become Majority Leader is a real sign that even though the generic Republican is ticking up on the generic ballot for 2018, there's still a sense and a worry among Republicans that they could lose at least one and possibly both chambers. There is a heightened sense that that is a possibility. Democrats, though, are not completely assured that they are going to retake one of the chambers in 2018. And so what we're seeing right now is a warning from leaders in both parties that the base needs to stay aware of what could happen and stay active.
All right, Daniel Strauss at Politico. Thank you as always, Daniel. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Survivors and parents of students from Stoneman Douglas High School demanded answers last night during a town hall meeting on CNN. Senators Marco Rubio and Bill Nelson joined Congressman Ted Deutsch and a spokeswoman from the NRA at the event. Now, Rubio was the only Republican lawmaker in attendance. He spent most of the night defending his stance on gun rights.
Senator Rubio, my daughter, running down the hallway at Marjory Stoneman Douglas, was shot in the back with an assault weapon, the weapon of choice. Yes, sir. Okay? It is too easy to get. It is a weapon of war. The fact that you can't stand with everybody in this building and say that, I'm sorry. Look at me and tell me guns were the factor in the hunting of our kids in this school this week. And look at me and tell me you accept it and you will work with us to do something about guns.
I'm saying that the problems that we're facing here today cannot be solved by gun laws alone. And I'm going to tell you what we've done already and what I hope we'll do moving forward.
Were guns the factor in the hunting of our kids? Of course they were.
Can you tell me right now that you will not accept a single donation from the NRA in the future?
The influence of these groups comes not from money. The influence comes from the millions of people that agree with the agenda.
A teenager is being called a hero after foiling an alleged school shooting plot in Vermont. Jack Sawyer was reported to the authorities by Angela McDevitt. He allegedly sent her disturbing text messages about a plan to shoot up his old high school. In another message, he even allegedly praised the deadly school shooting that took place in Florida last week. Here's Meg Oliver.
This investigation spanned across state lines, involving agencies in New York and Vermont. But it would not have been possible if it wasn't for the brave 17-year-old who told authorities that her friend might be planning a deadly attack.
I texted him saying that the school just got shot up. And he answered, "That's fantastic. I 100% support it."
Angela McDevitt says she met 18-year-old Jack Sawyer while at a treatment center in Maine for troubled teens. When you were at the treatment facility, what was Jack Sawyer like?
It always struck me he was very attentive to detail and very kind.
McDevitt says she stayed in touch with Sawyer after they left the facility, but last week their friendship took a turn. According to a Vermont State Police affidavit, on February 11th, Sawyer wrote to McDevitt over Facebook Messenger saying, "Just a few days ago, I was still plotting on shooting up my old high school." The next day he wrote, "It's been the plan for 2 years." And on February 14th, he allegedly praised the Florida school shooting, writing, "It's just natural selection taken up a notch."
I found them disturbing and knew I had to contact somebody in Vermont to look further into it.
One day after the Florida shooting, McDevitt met with her New York high school resource officer, Evan Trout, who then contacted authorities in Vermont.
People are calling you a hero as well.
I followed through with it, and that's about it. I mean, she definitely is the one who did the most of it.
According to the affidavit, when police interviewed Sawyer, he admitted he was planning a shooting at Fairhaven Union High School and was partly inspired by Columbine. He bought a shotgun a few days before. Police say when they searched his car, they found the shotgun, ammunition, books on Columbine, a gas mask, a video recorder, and a journal detailing his plan titled The Journal of an Active Shooter. Police say Sawyer told them he was going to use an AR-15, a handgun, and his shotgun to carry out the attack. McDevitt says it wasn't easy to report Sawyer, but she is glad she did.
What's your message to other students if they hear of something like this or they see a text message like this?
It's not the matter of friendship if it's about life's at hand. It's you need to do what you need to do.
According to the affidavit, Sawyer is diagnosed with ADHD, depression, and anxiety. Sawyer's public defender said publicly there are a lot of unproved allegations in this case, and it's a lot different than initially portrayed. Anne-Marie, Vlad.
All right, Meg Oliver, thank you very much. YouTube is facing criticism after it spread conspiracy theories about the deadly Florida school shooting. The top trending video on the site yesterday falsely accused survivor David Hogg of being an actor. I can tell you, I interviewed Mr. Hogg. He is not an actor. He is a student at Stoneman Douglas High School. Now, that video was viewed more than 200,000 times before it was taken down. A spokesperson for YouTube said in a statement, quote, "This video should have never appeared in trending because the video contained footage from an authoritative news source. Our system misclassified it." This is the second time this year that YouTube has received backlash for its trending videos. Last month, Logan Paul removed a video he posted of a suicide victim. Earlier, senior writer at Wired, Izzy Lepowski, joined CBS This Morning with more on the problems YouTube is facing.
There are people watching this, but there were a few ways that YouTube's system broke down here. Basically, this video was a clip of David Hogg speaking to a local news affiliate years ago about an incident he saw on the beach. So YouTube's algorithms look at that and say, okay, this is a legitimate news source. Then they look at the caption to the video. The caption said, "David Hogg, the actor." Well, there's nothing inherently harassing about those words. For some people, that's just a fact. For some people, it's a compliment. And YouTube's algorithms don't have all the context to know that, in fact, David Hogg is the survivor of a school shooting.
But people are unwittingly liking and sharing what is propaganda.
Exactly. So that really falls to the moderators, YouTube's moderators around the world. And YouTube would say that, you know, we have people watching these videos, we have people monitoring the flags, but not everybody has the context about this specific conspiracy right here in the United States. YouTube is adding moderators. They say they're scaling up to 10,000 moderators this year. But the question is, with 400 hours of video going up on YouTube every minute, could 10 million moderators possibly...
Taking you out to the White House, where moments ago, President Trump with state and local officials on school safety. This comes after he held a listening session yesterday with Americans impacted by gun violence. Let's listen.
Alex Azar, who is really setting the world on fire now, huh? With your lowering of prescription drug prices and a lot of other things you're doing, and we appreciate it very much. A lot of people are seeing it already, what's happening, and especially the lowering of the price of health care. We see what's going on there. It's going to be a tremendous reduction in healthcare pricing because of what we're all doing together. So great going, Alex. And Secretary Betsy DeVos for joining us. Today we're here with state and local leaders, law enforcement officers, and education officials to discuss how we can make our schools safe and our communities secure. And no better time to discuss it than right now. And I think we're making a lot of progress, and I can tell you there's a tremendous feeling that we want to get something done. And we're leading that feeling, I hope, but there's a great feeling, including at the NRA, including with Republican senators and hopefully Democrat senators and congressmen. I want to thank Curtis Hill for being here, Attorney General. I also want to thank a really tremendous Attorney General. That's Pam Bondi from Florida for being here. Thank you, Pam, very much. Great job you've done there. Yesterday I met with survivors of Parkland shooting. The Parkland shooting is just horrible. So bad for so many people and so bad for our country. Families who have lost their children in school shootings and local community members of Washington, D.C. who want to make sure that every child is safe at school. They're having a lot of problems in Washington, D.C. I listened to their heartbreaking stories, asked them for their ideas, and pledged to them that we will take action, unlike for many years where people sitting in my position did not take action. They didn't take proper action. They took no action at all. We're going to take action. Today we want to hear from you on how we can improve physical security in our schools, tackle the issue of mental health, which is a very big issue. This person that was caught after having killed so many people, 17, and badly injuring so many others. People don't talk about the injured, and they have to go through life with that horrible, horrible situation that they were put in unnecessarily. People don't talk about that. The people that are so badly, I visited them in the hospital in Broward County, and these are injuries like people wouldn't believe. And we want to ensure that when we see warning signs, we act quickly. When we have somebody that's mentally unstable, or like this guy that was a sicko, and there was a lot of warning signs. A lot of people were calling saying, hey, he's going to do something bad. People have to act. As I said last week, we must work together to create a culture of our country that cherishes life and fosters real human connections. We're also working to reduce violent crime in America and to make our communities places that can be totally safe for our children, for our families. Under my administration, gun prosecutions have increased very significantly. The Attorney General is very, very much after that, and we're also after the gangs. The gangs have been incredible. MS-13, I see where a couple of commentators that are lightweights said, oh, MS-13, who talks about that? That's only talked about on Fox. No, that's not talked about on Fox. That's talked about in communities where they're killing people. Not necessarily with guns, because that's not painful enough. This is what they think. They want to do it more painfully, and they want to do it slowly. So they cut them up with knives. They don't use guns, they use knives, because they want it to be a long, painful death to people that had no idea this was coming. And we're getting them out by the thousands, putting them in jail, and we're getting them out by the thousands. And our people from ICE and our Border Patrol people are much tougher than they are. That's the only thing they understand, by the way, is toughness. They don't understand niceness. They understand toughness. And our people are much tougher. They go in there, they grab them by the neck. There's no games being played. And I let them know that's what we want. We need tougher people than they are. And our people are a lot tougher than they are. So we're working on getting violent offenders off the streets and guns out of the hands of the dangerous criminals. There's nothing more important than protecting our children. We had a really incredible meeting yesterday with some of the families that have suffered so gravely in different places, not only in Florida. As you know, Columbine, and it was a very sad situation. But I will tell you, background checks, I've called many senators last night, many congressmen, and Jeff and Pam and everybody in this room. I can tell you, Curtis, they're into doing background checks that they wouldn't be thinking about maybe 2 weeks ago. We're going to do strong background checks. We're going to work on getting the age up to 21 instead of 18. We're getting rid of the bump stocks, and we're going to be focusing very strongly on mental health, because here's a case of mental health. Part of the problem is we used to have mental institutions, and I said this yesterday. We had a mental institution where you take a sicko like this guy. He was a sick guy, so many signs, and you'd bring him to a mental health institution. Those institutions are largely closed because communities didn't want them. Communities didn't want to spend the money for them. So you don't have any intermediate ground. You can't put him in jail because he hadn't done anything yet, but you know he's going to do something. So we're going to be talking seriously about opening mental health institutions again. In some cases, reopening. I can tell you in New York, the governors in New York did a very, very bad thing when they closed our mental institutions, so many of them. You have these people living on the streets, and I can say that in many cases throughout the country, they're very dangerous. They shouldn't be there. So we're going to be talking about mental institutions, and when you have some person like this, you can bring them into a mental institution, and they can see what they can do, but we got to get them out of our communities. So with that being said, I'd like to ask the very talented people around this table to just introduce themselves quickly and say a few words, and maybe we can start off with Pam Bondi. Pam,
Thanks, President.
thank you.
I'm Pam Bondi, Attorney General of Florida, and Mayor, thank you. I know you're going through a lot now. President, she was there that night with me. I think you were there with me until 3:30 in the morning when all these families were being notified, and it was horrific. So I know you've been through a lot, so thank you so much.
Sure, great job.
I have a couple issues that I'll wait, and do I want to talk about them now?
Talk about them.
Later?
You can talk.
Well, one, it addresses some of the things you said. In Florida, it's called the Baker Act, but it's our Civil Commitment Act, and it's weak. And it's about 1,000 pages long, and I've had my Solicitor General on it for 3 days now, working on it. We're rewriting it along with Governor Scott, who's, you're going to meet with him. He's going to give you a ton of good information. We've been rewriting it, and we are going to bring in something called the Gun Violence Restraining Order. So if someone is civilly committed, and typically you can hold them for up to 72 hours, but people are getting out within 24 hours, the majority of them. So what we want to do is let law enforcement come in and take the guns.
Good.
They're a danger to themselves
Which you can't do
others.
right now.
Well, because without being adjudicated. So because they're a danger to themselves.
You want them to take the guns and
when they are
not go through 6 months of legal trials and everything
exactly.
else,
but we also have to give the mentally ill the due process in which they deserve, President. So what we're doing is they're going to be able to take the guns when they're taken into custody or into the hospital, and then when they're released within 24 hours or 72 hours later, typically it's 24 hours, but law enforcement will have 72 hours to determine whether they should give those guns back, or they can go to a judge and say, Your Honor, please keep these guns. We feel this person is still a danger to himself or others, whether
so
they're
this
in or
would
out
not
of
have
custody.
worked the way it's currently constituted. This would not have worked with Cruz as it's currently constituted.
As it's currently written.
So you're going to make changes?
We're going to make changes. And one other thing we're doing about the reporting, President, which is huge, this is a big issue. We need a clearinghouse, and that's what we've all been discussing. And we have created, and several of my counterparts have done it around the country, but we're the biggest state doing it. It's an app, because kids now are on social media. And there were so many warning signs on Snapchat, on Twitter, on Instagram, and they were posting them, they were sending them, but to all different sources. We're going to have, and we just got it written in our House and Senate budget, it'll cost at least $500,000 a year to fund this. But what it does, kids, and so I met with 10 students, and they loved it, and they said, I'm empowering them. 3 of them are my graphic designers. They're going to design the icons. Some are going to name it. They're helping us with it. But it'll cost probably about $100,000 maximum to develop. That's all in our budget. So what kids can do now, they can automatically send something that says, I'm going to buy a gun, just like Cruz was doing. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And one of the girls who I met with, one of the students, told me he had been doing this since middle school. He had bullied her, and she reported it. So it will all, they can instantly, and they can do it with anonymity. Put it in this app. Good. It'll go in the app, and it'll go to one clearinghouse with state law enforcement in Florida.
Well, you mentioned the internet. We have to look at the internet because a lot of bad things are happening to young kids and young minds, and their minds are being formed. And we have to do something about maybe what they're seeing and how they're seeing it. And also video games. I'm hearing more and more people say the level of violence on video games is really shaping young people's thoughts. And then you go the further step, and that's the movies. You see these movies, they're so violent, and yet a kid is able to see the movie if sex isn't involved, but killing is involved, and maybe they have to put a rating system for that. And you get into a whole very complicated, very big deal. But the fact is that you are having movies come out that are so violent with the killing and everything else that maybe that's another thing we're going to have to discuss. And a lot of people are saying it. You have these movies today where you can go and have a child see the movie, and yet it's so violent and so disgusting. So we may have to talk about that also. Well, thank you very much, Pam.
Thanks, President.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
No. Well, it's, Mr. President, my school teacher wife watched your meeting yesterday. She was very moved by it and shared. I think it has touched people all over the country. I salute you for that. And I won't talk now. Others have got things they'll say. I would say that we believe we can do better. We believe that some of the things that Attorney General Bondi is talking about can work. We've done a lot of research in this country over the last several years. We need to go back and act on it. It's one thing to research, as you indicated, another thing to do something about it. And we think we can help you develop the kind of policies that will make America safer.
Good, thank you. And you're doing a great job with the gangs. The gangs are such a problem. You know, we talk about child safety. The kids walk home and they meet one of these gangs, and these are absolute animals. These aren't human beings. These are animals. And it's the torture, the level of torture. In this country, who would ever believe a thing like this could happen? But we're literally getting MS-13 out by the thousands. But they come in. These are smart. They're smart. They actually have franchises going to Los Angeles. We're getting no help from the state of California. I mean, frankly, if I wanted to pull our people from California, you would have a crime nest like you've never seen in California. All I'd have to do is say, ICE and Border Patrol, let California alone. You'd be inundated. You would see crime like nobody's ever seen crime in this country. And yet we get no help from the state of California. They are doing a lousy management job. They have the highest taxes in the nation. And they don't know what's happening out there. Frankly, it's a disgrace. The sanctuary city situation, the protection of these horrible criminals, you know, because you're working on it. And the protection of these horrible criminals in California and other places, but in California, that if we ever pulled our ICE out, if we ever said, hey, let California alone, let them figure it out for themselves, in 2 months they'd be begging for us to come back. They would be begging. And you know what? I'm thinking about doing it. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Charles McDonald, Mr. President, it's a pleasure to be here. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for your support, certainly for all the sheriffs in North Carolina, if not all of law enforcement.
Well, Congressman Meadows is a big fan of yours, that I can tell you. You know who I'm talking about, right?
Thank you, sir.
He's a good man.
I've been very impressed, Mr. President, with a lot of the ideas I've heard just since before you came in, actually, and I do think mental health is a serious issue. It's affecting us across the nation. I know it is in North Carolina. I appreciate your courage, sir, to talk about the fact that I do think there is a place for properly trained people in certain areas as well. I think multi-layered, like an onion, security's got a lot of facets, and I believe that you've got certainly the courage and leadership to bring all of this together. I know there's a lot of good ideas out there. I think they all need to be listened to, but it's going to take a lot of courage on the part of leaders, I think, in this nation to bring the community together to help them do the things that they really want to do in their heart, but maybe haven't had the courage to do yet. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sheriff. It's going to take a lot of political courage. You're right.
Yes, sir.
A lot of political courage. Some of it won't be politically correct, but time for political correctness is over. We have to get this problem solved. So you're right about that. Thank you, Sheriff. Yes, Rick.
Mr. President, Rick Sanders, Commissioner of the Kentucky State Police, and much like Florida, we went through this last month. We had a school shooting at Marshall County High School. And, you know, we're going to hear a lot about what we can do in the future to help protect our children. What I'm concerned with is what are we going to do now to protect our children? And there's going to be a lot of debate, but I applaud you, sir, for having the courage to bring together law enforcement, mental health professionals, and educators all sitting around this table to decide together what we need to do. I'm real curious to hear what Attorney General Bondi continues to do in Florida. I think the gun violence restraining order is critically important. And I also think that we, as law enforcement, we need to create a database in our fusion centers where we can take information that we have on students that may be a threat and put that into a database so that the FBI can share with local law enforcement and state police, and we all have that information that we can act upon. And more importantly, I think there should be something coming out of that we did something with it. And it didn't just lay there, but we took that information and we actually acted on that. And that's something I'm very interested in pursuing.
Thank you, Rick. The federal government is really going to be a coordinator between all of the states so that you give information and other states will have that information. Otherwise, there's no way of getting it.
That's right.
So we'll be doing that. And I have to say, the states are starting to act. Florida, as an example, your state, a lot of states are starting to act on their own. They don't necessarily need 100% from the federal government. Federal government's going to help a lot, but a lot of states can do some of the things that I'm talking about on their own. And I really implore them to do it, and to do it as quickly as possible, as you understand.
And
Thank you.
Governor Scott is president. Wait till you see what Governor Scott is about to release.
Governor Scott is a great example.
It's great.
He's going to do a lot of things, and again, there'll be coordination with the federal government, but the states can do a lot of this work on their own and get it done very quickly. Paula?
Yes, I'm Paula Stone, and I'm a mental health professional, although I now work for the Department of Human Services in the area of making sure that mental health services are provided to the citizens of Arkansas. And so I think what you said about early warning signs is very important to note, and access to appropriate services. In training educators, there's programs called Mental Health First Aid, where educators can be trained at how to identify those early warning signs and making sure that those services are easily accessible, because access is a problem. If somebody has to leave the school grounds and go to a clinic, wait for an appointment, then you've lost all that time. If you can have mental health professionals that are located in schools, co-located with physicians, in places where people go into the community, so those people are identified with those needs and get those services very quickly before it gets to the point of having some significant needs. Mental health professionals also, for people that have more significant needs, can wrap around the whole families, because a lot of times the families are asking for help, but they haven't gotten that support. There may be stigma, there may be access issues. You want to make sure that all of those services are there, readily available, that there's no stigma to those services, and that they can have those. And then we were talking down at this end of the table a minute ago about then when it gets to the point where somebody's scared or somebody gets arrested. We are starting crisis stabilization units in our state. And other states have used crisis stabilization units, and our Governor Hutchinson has given some funds for us to start them in our state. They are units which is not just mental health, but it's a partnership between the county, the mental health agency in that area, and the law enforcement. So when law enforcement is trained with crisis intervention training, they can identify people when they arrest them that they have a mental illness or they're having a mental health issue. Instead of taking them to jail, where they wouldn't receive that treatment or where it'd be very difficult for them to be screened, they can take them to the crisis stabilization units. They can hold them there for 72 hours. They can do screenings, they can begin treatment, and then they can make sure that they get filtered into the right treatment. Also working with the judiciary and the law enforcement officials. It's a partnership, a collaboration with them all.
Thank you, Paul. Say hello to the governor.
I will.
He's a great governor.
He is.
He is. Done a great job. Alex?
Well, Mr. President, as you know, you last year had identified serious mental illness as one of the core priorities at HHS already. And that involved funding, and also involved creating the interdepartmental coordinating committee around serious mental illness to pull all the resources of the federal government together around these issues. And I've enjoyed the discussion so far this morning with these experts around some of the areas of how we're building our future agenda here to really tackle these issues of serious mental illness around the issues of violence. One of those areas is education. What can we do better to assist educators and parents and first responders on dealing with serious mental illness situations? Second is, what can we do around screening and identification of those at risk for serious mental illness? The third is treatment, both preventive treatment for those who are recently diagnosed, but also those who are in imminent risk of danger to themselves or others. And that might involve involuntary issues, as we talked about earlier. How can we be of assistance there to get people the care that they need to live fruitful and good lives, but also be safe? The fourth is community engagement. So often serious mental illness is part of being disengaged and disconnected, and how can we reconnect people or keep them connected? And then finally is research on the next generations of therapies. What can we in the federal government do to help bring the research and next generation therapies for mental illness to the table for people?
That's great, Alex. That's great. Thank you very much. The mayor of Parkland, Florida has suffered greatly, seen things that you never thought you would ever be a part of or seen. And I just want to say, Christine, on behalf of all of us, you have done a great job. You have been given a rough hand, but you have done a great job.
Yeah, I would just first of all like to say thank you. I don't know if you realize how much it meant to the students to be able to have a voice and to be heard by you and your administration. That's a very empowering thing for the students, and we appreciate it immensely.
Thank you.
We spoke yesterday, and this roundtable has been amazing. I am grateful to be able to be here. This didn't just happen in a vacuum. There was a whole timeline that led to this. And I'm very happy that there's such a commitment to action on all the steps that could have been taken to prevent it. The beginning of the mental health portion of it, the police portion of it. If there had been better communication, maybe that could have been acted on. What's very important to our residents right now is the school safety portion of it. That someone like that cannot gain access to these schools, and that our students are safe going to school. And it's very important that we act on that as quickly as possibly, because that is where the parents and the students are afraid right now. And then on the end, how did somebody like this person get access to that kind of firearm? And I think what Pam Bondi's working on is wonderful, and thank you so much for allowing us a seat at the table and for really listening and being committed to action. I think that makes us all very hopeful.
Well, thank you, and I'm so sorry for what you've gone through. I mean, few people will ever go through what you've gone through over the last week, and we really all appreciate it. You've been an incredible mayor, and at a time when they need it, really, right now, a very incredible mayor. The amazing thing about Parkland, which I know, Florida is a special place that I know very well, this is probably the last place in this country where you'd think a thing like this could happen.
We were safest city.
Yeah.
We're one of the safest cities.
Yeah.
The message is, if it can happen here, it can happen anywhere.
That's true.
And it's very important that we do everything we can to secure our schools so that the students feel safe there and the parents feel safe sending them there. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Christine. Andrew?
Well, Mr. President, we had a really great conversation, and I want to leave more time for the other participants to discuss. We can brief you later on more of the great ideas and issues that these leaders have talked about, particularly as you continue to lead this discussion and prepare for your conversation with the governors. So.
Thank you, Andrew. And Kellyanne Conway, though, I'll have you say, I think most people know Kellyanne. She's become a pretty big star. What do you think?
Big star.
Pretty big star. I think the best, right? Would you like to say something? Because I know it's a very important issue for you personally.
Yes, sir. Thank you for yesterday and today. And the one thing I would mention, because we heard it from the mayor before you walked in the room, we heard it from Mr. Scott yesterday, whose daughter, Rachel Joy Scott, was the first fatality at Columbine 19 years ago, is this lack of connectedness for our youth. And some of the social media outlets you mentioned didn't even exist in 1999. But it is this lack of connectedness, and I think that's a whole other type of stigma and silence that needs to be cured in our society. We all have a role to play there. There's an entire spectrum of actors. We should watch our words and our actions and realize that there are many different causes and symptoms and consequences, obviously. But at the same time, if we're focusing on youth, we need to focus on all youth and the ability for them to feel that they are connected. That is not with respect to any one individual. It's just, I heard it very clearly from Mr. Scott yesterday, very clearly from our mayor, and very clearly from the President of the United States moments ago. Thank you very much for being a leader on this, Mr. President. I think that you have a great opportunity to join with the nation and help them to heal and to move forward in a way that shows not just resilience, but great resolve, and not just talk, but action. And we're very grateful that you're president at this time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kellyanne. Patrick.
Mr. President, Patrick Neville, Colorado House Minority Leader and also a former Columbine student who was there that day. Thank you for your leadership on this issue. You're absolutely right. I read some of your comments from last night, but we have to find a way to let good people defend our students. We can't let criminals think that this is going to be an easy target for them to enter their schools and injure our students. We have to find a way to harden those targets so that our students aren't sitting ducks. Furthermore, I think that we do have some good programs to model off of. The Safe to Tell program in Colorado has been wildly successful. That's similar to what Pam Bondi was talking about. It can be used not just for school violence actions, but it can also be used for suicidal ideations and other things of that nature. But that's what I think we have to do immediately. But I think we also need to realize, too, it's not just about the guns. My experience is pretty unique in Columbine. That there was also 2 propane tanks that were supposed to be a bomb that was going to go off. By the grace of God, that didn't happen. But there are other ways that people can commit these atrocious acts. So I appreciate your approach on this by listening before just reacting.
Well, I appreciate what you're saying, and I've watched you and read about you, and you have a great story where you came from, and you're doing so fantastically well right now. But I happen to agree with you. We have to harden our schools, not soften them up. A gun-free zone to a killer or somebody that wants to be a killer, that's like going in for the ice cream. That's like, here I am, take me. We have to get smart on gun-free zones. When they see it says this is a gun-free zone, that means that nobody has a gun except them. Nobody's going to be shooting bullets in the other direction. And they see that as such a beautiful target. They live for gun-free zones. And, I mean, frankly, you have teachers that are Marines for 20 years and they retire, they become a teacher, and they're Army, Navy, Air Force, they're Coast Guard, they're people that have won shooting contests, and, you know, they're for whatever. This is what they do. They know guns, they understand guns. And I, frankly, have been reading a lot about it, and I think when you allow a person who's been in the Marines for 20 years, who's done nothing but handle guns and handle them safely and well, because you can't just give a teacher a gun. One of the fake news networks, CNN last night, was saying, I want teachers to have guns. I don't want teachers to have guns. I want certain highly adept people, people that understand weaponry, guns, if they really have that aptitude, because not everybody has an aptitude for a gun. But if they have the aptitude, I think a concealed permit for having teachers and letting people know that there are people in the building with guns, you won't have, in my opinion, you won't have these shootings, because these people are cowards. They're not going to walk into a school if 20% of the teachers have guns. It may be 10%, or maybe 40%. And what I'd recommend doing is the people that do carry, we give them a bonus. We give them a little bit of a bonus. Frankly, they'd feel more comfortable having the gun anyway, but you give them a little bit of a bonus. So practically for free, you have now made the school into a hardened target. For instance, if the coaches, who I guarantee had plenty of experience with weapons, if they had guns, you need a hard, because no matter what you do to keep them gun-free, they'll be able to get in there and they'll crawl through the back of a window or something. And you're going to have everybody again without any protection. So I know where you stand on it. You want a hardened school. And I want a hardened school too. I want to know that if they get in there, they're not going to be long, because it's going to take 10 minutes for the police to get there. The police do an incredible job in getting there. I guess it averages about 8 minutes, but the shootings average 3 minutes, and that's tremendous destruction and death. So I would like to see true people with great talent at guns and being adept at guns, of which there's only a percentage of people. But whatever that percentage may be, it's a substantial number. Because you can't hire enough security guards. You can't hire, I mean, the school, your school as an example, Christine, you'd need 100, 150 security guards. That is a very big school with a tremendous floor area. You can't have that many. Who wants that many security guards standing all over the place, loaded up with guns? But you could have concealed on the teachers. They wouldn't know the people. Nobody would know who they are. And it is a tremendous threat. And by the way, instead of advertising, this school has no guns, we are gun-free, You let the people know the opposite. Nobody's going to attack that school, believe me, because they're cowards. They don't want to be shot at, and they're going to be shot at. So not everybody agrees with us. I know how you stand, and a lot of people do agree with us. But I think we need hardened sights. We need to let people know, you come into our schools, you're going to be dead, and it's going to be fast. And unless you do that, you're going to always have this problem. You can talk about your gun-free zones. We had a case 3 years ago on a military base where 5 Marines, I believe, 3 of whom were world-class shots and experts at guns. They were told it was a gun-free area within a military base, if you can believe it. If we can't trust our military, who are we going to trust? You know what I'm saying. 5, they were putting away, they put away their guns. Their guns were in a different section. Totally gun-free. Their guns were 250 yards away from them, where they had to store them. And they went in for lunch, and a wacko came in and shot the 5 of them. He wouldn't have lasted for 3 of these people were world-class marksmen. He wouldn't have lasted for a second. But they stood there. There was nothing they could do. All 5 were killed. You know the instance I'm talking about. That was at a gun-free zone on a military base. Well, a school is frankly no different. I want my schools protected just like my banks are protected, just like everything else. And I get a kick. I was watching a politician, weak, ineffective politician last night. I'll tell you his name, but I don't want to embarrass anybody. And he was talking about no guns, no this, no that. And yet he's surrounded by 3 guys carrying guns. I said, well, when are they going to give up their guns? They're not going to give up their guns. But he wants everybody else to have no guns, all right? And you have plenty of them. So we have to harden our sights. We have to be very careful. And these people, as adept as they may, they have to go to training. I would say every 6 months or every year. They have to have a fairly, you know, really a rigorous course in what they're doing. And they should be paid extra money. Those teachers should be paid extra money. So they get a bonus, and they'd love getting that bonus too. And it would be much less expensive than the guards. It wouldn't look bad. You know, if you have guards, it looks like you have an armed camp. That would look terrible. Because people are talking, we're going to put a lot of security guards in the buildings. It would look terrible. And it would be much more effective. But I'll tell you what, if you harden these sites in that way or some other way in a similar fashion, not only teachers, coaches, there could be other people that work in the building. If you hardened the sites, you're not going to have this problem. Because these guys who lack courage will never go into those schools. Those schools are going to be safe. But when you say a school is gun-free, it's got no guns, no nothing, it's gun-free, boy, that's what they want to hear. So I agree with you, Patrick. Strongly agree with you.
Fred Kittle from Bartow County Schools in Bartow County, Georgia. First, so my mom doesn't whoop me, thank you for March 29th for the veteran. She's a Vietnam widow, and my uncle's a wounded veteran, former police chief in Bossier City. What we're doing in our, I've got to thank Clarence Roby of BNS, who's, as you know, school boards. We have regular jobs and do this on the side. But one of the things that we're doing in our school system, and Georgia has given the school boards a lot of power, and you are absolutely correct. There's things local can already do. We have the single point of entry at all of our schools. You have to be buzzed to get in. We do have resource officers, and like you said, it would take quite a bit. We have, I believe it's 7 with our school, and we have 13,332 students and 892 teachers there. But we also work really closely with our law enforcement. For example, one of our middle schools and elementary police stations right around the corner, and we do pay the sheriff's department and local police to help do when people are coming and going to do the traffic, but it's also they're there and they're present, so that's also a deterrent.
How many are in the school? Because when you have a sheriff's department, they don't have enough people to really take care of a school. That's the problem.
You're absolutely correct. Now here's something the state of Georgia did after the last shootings in 2014 in giving the school systems the authority. We're allowed to, if the school board so votes on it, we actually can have armed employees. They do have to go through their safety firearm training and that, and then our resource officers also go through a third party, another party, to for training each year. So you're absolutely correct. And there is more that can be done. And I think a lot of it, too, that we need to address, too, is the heart problem, the heart issue. You know, one of the things that comes out is the family. We come from a community where the faith-based community just wants to help all they can. When the tornadoes hit Adairsville, FEMA thought they were going to be there a long time, very short. People volunteered, came out with chainsaws right when it happened, and they had to send them back because they had to get the power and gas and all that. But when you're allowed to have the faith-based, it does a lot. Right now, they're trying to figure out how to help us in all kinds of ways, but because of this separation of church and state that was never intended. So we would appreciate if you keep electing, or not electing, appointing the justices like you're doing that follow the Constitution on there.
We're having great success with the appointment of justices, that's true, and judges.
And I need to say this so they don't fuss at me, but we have a lot of people praying for you and your administration there in Georgia. We have quite a few churches there. We have a group called President's Team. Once a week they pray for y'all.
Thank you.
They're praying for you and your community. I know that may sound, you know, with the devastation, I can't imagine. I've got 6 kids, and I can't imagine losing any of those. In fact, watching what you had, and I love how you're having everybody discuss and talk, and then a solution. I mean, you're solving things that we hear politicians for 30 years, and you're doing it within a year, and we really appreciate it. And we kind of taken your motto, just do your job, and that just works phenomenally, because when it's one person responsible, then we know where it comes down on.
Well,
so we
I want the
appreciate
politicians to watch, like yesterday, very importantly. They watched, and a lot of them saw that, and they saw the devastation that's caused. And, you know, some of them maybe don't know if they don't get to see. I mean, I was with those families, and those families are devastated. And I want the politicians to see that, because they have to pass legislation. They have to do things. And I'm the biggest believer of the Second Amendment that there is, okay? I am the biggest. But I'll tell you what, I spoke with the NRA, the top people, and I spoke, and they gave me tremendous support, and tremendous. I think I had their earliest, I was probably the earliest one, Kellyanne, from what I hear, ever. You know, they endorsed me at the absolute earliest point that you could. And so I'm a believer. But I spoke to them, and they're ready to do things. They want to do things. You know, they're good people. They're patriots. They love this country. But the NRA is ready to do things. And, you know, people like to blame them, and they do have power and all of that, but they want to do, they actually came up with certain of the rules and regulations that we have now, but we're going to have to toughen, I told them, I said, we're going to have to toughen them up, because it doesn't make anybody look good. And most importantly, I saw the devastation of these families. We can't allow that to happen. But again, we need a hardened school, but we want to harden it without having everybody standing there with a rifle. I don't want that either, because that's no good. That sets a lot of bad signals. Like, as an example, I'm watching John Kelly, General John Kelly. So he's a 4-star Marine. He's a tough cookie. If he was a teacher of mine, I wouldn't mind having him have a gun, because I guarantee he can use it better than anybody. There's no security guard you're going to hire that's going to handle a gun better than him. So if he's a teacher, and if other friends of his from the Marine, if they're teaching, or other people like that, I want them to have a gun. But more importantly, almost more importantly, nobody's going to attack that school, because they know General Kelly is the history teacher. He's teaching about how we win wars, okay? And he's got a concealed weapon, but they're going to know he's got a concealed, because we tell them that the bullets are going to be flying in the other direction. You're not going to have these attacks if you do that. If you're going to continue with this nonsense about a gun-free zone, gun-free, it sounds so good. It's like, it sounds so great. It is such a target for the killer. They look for gun-free zones because, believe it or not, they don't want to get killed.
And we are a soft target, you know, so many diggers and that.
Well, look at the guy in Florida. He tried to escape with the other, right? He had a great policeman, caught him in a different community. Right. But he actually escaped. He didn't want to get shot. If he would have known that he was going to be shot, because he's a coward. But he tried to escape. He did actually escape. They had a great policeman in a different community, found him. So that's what we need.
One of our board members did ask me to ask you, however, when we're looking at all these solutions, and and we all know that the kids are precious and we need to do whatever we need to do. But at the same time, one of the things that hurts our systems a lot is when we come up with these unfunded mandates, we'll suddenly have something that, that we have to do and we don't necessarily have the money. So if it is something on the federal level, we would like to make sure that it's funded, because we've already had to go to a different block schedule. It cost us 30 teachers, and we don't want to.
This isn't so much about funding. This is more about common sense. I mean, the money we're talking about, what I'm talking about is going to save money. Everybody that agrees on a hard, they're all talking about having 50 security guards standing all over the school, which is, going to be very not nice for the students. I'm talking about something where they're there anyway, where they get a little extra money because they happen to carry, where they go for training every year. I mean, we're talking about rules and regulations for purchasing. We're talking about changing an age from 18 to 21. I mean, so they buy a revolver, a handgun, they buy at the age of 21. And yet, these other weapons that we talk about, that some people don't like, they're allowed to buy them at 18. So how does that make sense? How does that make sense? So I say that it should all be at 21. But we're not really talking about money. We're talking about common sense. And it's a great thing. And the NRA will back it. I really feel very confident. The NRA will back it, and so will Congress, and so will the Senate.
We'd like to not focus on just the tool. You're also focusing on mental illness and other issues and family.
No, focus on mental illness. Yeah. You got to focus on mental illness. It's a big factor. But in addition to mental illness, we have to harden our schools. We have to make sure, in a way that doesn't look like they're hardened. But we have to let the bad guy know that they are hardened. There's not going to be no, we don't want to have a secret. Say, you come in here, you're not going to last long. You do that, you're not going to have a problem. Betsy, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you so much for your leadership on this. The session yesterday was difficult and very moving, but very important. I really appreciate our focus on both protection, but also on prevention. And I think particularly about this issue of connectedness. And I think of all of our teachers and what tools can we give them, what practices that they can do daily, weekly, bi-weekly. I heard a great story about a teacher following Columbine who now every 2 weeks asks her students to make a list of 5 students that they'd like to sit by next week and 5 students who might like to sit by them. And by this simple act, regularly done, she is able to detect a pattern if there's a child that is on the outside. And this is a simple practice that can be implemented tomorrow, today. So I just really, my heart goes to the teachers who in some cases feel powerless, but I think we can help them and empower them with tools to notice these things.
Thanks, Betsy. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. President.
Pam?
Mr. President, I'm Pam Stewart. I'm the Commissioner of Education for the great state of Florida.
Right.
And it was a terrible tragedy. I appreciate so much your willingness to visit the victims and their families and to hear from students and parents yesterday, as well as convening this group today.
Thank you. Thank you.
The governor of Florida, Rick Scott, as you know, was in Parkland and has spent a great deal of time there. He also asked that we convene 3 roundtables, which we did on Tuesday, 1 on public safety, 1 on mental health, and 1 on school safety. I moderated the 1 on school safety. We discussed mental health. We discussed the policies and practices that need to be in place. We discussed the hardening of the building. And so many of the issues that have been brought up came up when we talked. Secretary DeVos has just mentioned one of those, which is what we would call Tier 1 social emotional issues, where that needs to be a practice where we are helping students feel connected so that we don't reach that point of Tier 3 or Tier 4 where we've got to have the mental health services to intervene on individuals like that individual. Practices being in place, we are required to have a fire drill in schools once a month. We are not required to have active shooter drills. And so a practice like that, where you put something like that into
But
place in our...
active shooter drills is a very negative thing. I'll be honest with you. I mean, if I'm a child and I'm 10 years old and they say, we're going to have an active shooter drill, I say, what's that? Well, people may come in and shoot you. I think that's a very negative thing to be talking about, to be honest with you. I don't like it. I'd much rather have a hardened school. I don't like it. I wouldn't want to tell my son that you're going to participate in an active shooter drill. And I know some of them actually call it that. I think it's crazy. I think it's very bad for children.
And I think calling it something else is something important. The student that served on our committee felt that it was important that he and other students would know what to do in an emergency of this type, so that they would know where to go, how to get out. Things like hardening the buildings so that there is, as the mayor has said, one point of entry. Having plans that are developed that have minimum standards that are established, and having those individuals in our schools who are ready to respond, as you had mentioned. The other issue that did come up was the ability to interface agencies together so that we are able to work together and know what one another are doing, and to better be able to address these issues as they arise.
Thank you, Pam, very much. Curtis?
Mr. President, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. And I want to start out by saying that as we all know, this is the freest nation on earth, and whatever measures we take have got to be consistent with the character of who we are as Americans, first and foremost. I'd like to make 3 points, things that we're doing in Indiana and things that we can do better in Indiana, and it goes to the discussion that we had here. Securing the physical environment of the school is an absolute must. Goes beyond policies and plans. We have a school in Indiana in Shelby County, Southwestern High School, which was participating in a pilot project, and wouldn't surprise you to know that was under the leadership of your Vice President, then Governor Pence. Through this program of innovation and technology in connection with the Indiana Sheriff's Association, the school created a model for security. And in this security, not only do we have bulletproof doors, bulletproof glass, we have containment zones. When the students are in the classrooms, the doors are locked. So we don't have to go up and lock them from the outside. And Mayor, we talked about that earlier. That was a concern you had and how that's done. This is all done automatically. The school is wired directly, securely to the Sheriff's Department 10 miles away. So the Sheriff's Department can monitor in real time what's occurring. Each teacher has a key fob so that when something occurs, they can communicate effectively and immediately with someone off-site. And the most
Do you have anybody inside with a gun that can take on the man that's right outside the door, that, by the way, can shoot right through the steel doors as they did in your school? Well, those bullets went right through those steel doors like they were butter.
That's a part of what's necessary, but I can tell you this, what else they have are countermeasures. Countermeasures that can be employed from the Sheriff's Department within seconds to contain the attacker and, in a sense, turn the attack on him. That's a critical piece. I would invite you to come to Shelby County and
I
see
just don't
this.
know what that means. Honestly, I don't know what that means.
Well, I can tell you what it means. When you're in the hallway, if you have an active shooter in the hall and he's going around and he's looking for targets, we've got the doors blocked, we've got it locked up, somebody's monitoring him, and for example, they have smoke canisters that can come in and blind the shooter, which detracts him from his target. That gives time, as you know, that critical time when he's alone looking for targets. Now he's discombobulated. He doesn't know where he's going. Hopefully. Well, that's the idea. I mean, these are not.
In the meantime, he's shooting everybody, though.
Well, in this particular school, they're locked down. We need to have those types of hard products or hard targets in our schools. We do need to have secure, I think, secured or highly skilled, highly trained individuals that would combine with that to make sure that if they do get in there, there is that deterrent. Another piece that I want to talk about is the mental health aspect in Indiana, and Pam's working on this in Florida. In Indiana, we already have what we call red flag laws. We have a law in Indiana that allows police officers who believe that someone is dangerous, or who believe that someone, or have reason to believe that someone has a mental illness and is off their medications or is otherwise a danger, to be able to take the guns, both under a warrant and in some circumstances without a warrant, but then to certainly provide due process for that particular individual. What that does, it gets us past the issue of the person's mental illness. We address the taking of the guns, we get them in court, they're allowed to have their day in court, but in the meantime, we're able to cool down this process and take the guns from someone, which is exactly the type of thing that we're not having all over the country. I think there's a handful of states that have this process. Sure. Indiana's been doing it for a number of years. We just issued a public safety advisory yesterday because what we learned is that many of our prosecutors and our police officers weren't even aware that we had it.
Yeah.
So we're making sure that that's getting out there. I would suggest that be something that all states adopt as quickly as possible. And one last point, to the extent that this is about guns, let it be about the illicit use of guns used inappropriately or in crimes, so that we can do what we do in Indiana and that we need to work on continually, is to enhance the penalties for any type of offense that's used with a firearm. Let's double down on that. If you commit a burglary or robbery with a firearm, you need to pay a severe consequence.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody. I just want to end by saying, and listening to so many suggestions, we really do have to have offensive measures also. I know people don't like talking about it, but we need offensive as well as defensive. We have to be totally defensive, but if we don't have offensive measures within these schools, you're just kidding yourselves, folks. You're just kidding yourselves. And if the offensive measures are strong and solid, you're going to stop the problem. You're going to stop the problem because they're not coming into that school. They'll find something else, unfortunately, but they're not coming into that school. So I just would like everybody to think about that, because I hear so many of these wonderful plans where you're going to live in this utopian school and there's not going to be any protection, there's not going to be any guns, there's not going to be any bullets flying at the perpetrator, the animal that wants to destroy the lives of families and children. Unless you're going to have offensive capability, you're wasting your time. You're wasting your time. And you're going to talk, and it'd be easier to pass. I'm sure you're having a lot of trouble in Florida passing because a lot of people don't understand it, or they do understand it, but it's politically what they want to believe. Because I want to end the problem. I don't want to have it where this happens again. And unless we're going to have an offensive capability, it's going to happen again and again and again, and it's going to be the same old story. And people are going to be sitting around tables and talking. I like to get things done. And to get this done, we do need defense, but we also need offensive capability. I want to thank everybody. You're really experts at what you're doing. And it's really tremendous hearing some of these ideas that a lot of people haven't heard. The media is now hearing things that they haven't heard. And a lot of people that are watching on television right now are hearing things that they haven't heard. So it's a horrible situation. We're going to get it stopped. And we're going to stop it through heart and through toughness. It's a combination of through love and through toughness. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. It's not going to stop. And again, thank you all very much. It's a great honor to be with you. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. President, high school teachers say that they don't want guns.
Go up against the NRA, sir, on age limits.
Thank you very much. I don't think I'll be going up against them. I really think the NRA wants to do what's right. I mean, they're very close to me. I'm very close to them. They're very, very great people. They love this country. They're patriots. The NRA wants to do the right thing. I've spoken to them often in the last 2 days. And they want to do the right thing. They're going to do the right thing. I have no doubt about it.
Do you think you can win that battle, sir?
It's not a battle. I think the NRA wants to do the right thing.
What do you say to teachers who say that they don't want guns in the classroom?
These are experts. These would be people that actually would want them. And it would be a small percentage, but it would be a lot of people. And once you do this, you will have a situation where all of a sudden this horrible plague will stop. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And we've been listening to President Trump hold a listening session with local officials on gun control. We will be back after a quick break. You're watching CBS Then.